in 2018 in the fall, she began to be having some health issues. And it was from the outset extremely complicated, involving a lot of different body systems. And if anybody has gone through some complex medical systems, then they know how challenging that is in and of itself. And so about a month and a half later, when they were able to identify exactly what was going on, the cancer had come back. It was in multiple organs, and there was not a concentrated mass that they could remove. And so it was very rapidly a pretty dire situation once it came back. And the thing that I'm really grateful for is that by this time I had been a member of a 12-step program for a couple of years. And I also, a couple months earlier, started a miracle morning process. That is a process that was developed by Hal Elrod. I love him. Check him out. He's got a great podcast. And the miracle morning process involves 6 processes. So that are summarized in an acronym called the SAVERS. So the first S is for silence, meaning meditation or prayer, or however, gratitude, however a person wants to use that silence. Affirmations, visualizations, reading, exercise, and scribing or journaling. So I started that practice of getting up a little bit early every morning and having that experience. And I'm so grateful for that, because I had a few months of that under my belt, and it offered a really strong framework for developing tools that were going to get me through what would be, up to this point, the most devastating loss I've experienced. And so a couple of weeks after her diagnosis, she had emergency surgery. I had also been ill with a bronchitis that really wouldn't quit. And I found myself with, coping and wrapping my head around the likelihood of losing my mom, being really physically ill, and going through this and seeing her in a tremendous amount of pain. When I was consulting with my doctor, I said, I think that with the level of stress that I'm under, I'm not sure that my body can heal. And he agreed and suggested that I take a low dose of an anti-anxiety medication at night. And with, heartfelt consideration, I agreed to do that as a temporary relief so that I could get my physical body back in health. My personal philosophy about health and wellness is to be an active participant in that. And so as I was taking a medication that, and I wanted it to be temporary, so I felt like I needed to put extra tools in. So I, saw a therapist for a little while. I made sure to get even more exercise, and I really, really committed very heavily into my miracle morning practice. Mm-hmm. The other thing,
just going back a little bit, Aime, I think that's amazing that you were. Well, it's almost like the universe was getting you ready, right, for that whole process as well. You had already those 2 months that you were already, waking up early, doing your morning practice. So you mentioned there was the 6 steps, and then you mentioned before the 12. So there was more kind of 12 steps. So there was also a lot of spiritual learning that you were kind of doing beforehand. So you kind of almost like strengthening yourself to, to get ready for what it was to come.
That was absolutely a foundation that, like I said, I had embarked upon several years prior. And so, without a doubt, that was a huge support for me, as well as my dear friends in that community. I also, before having these tools, one of my deepest fears was losing another person, that losing a loved one, to the point where I would almost like wish to die first because I couldn't imagine the pain of losing somebody. And so that was a really strong fear. And I shifted that, again, through the help of these tools. I shifted that, and anytime I observed that fear arise, I would just shift it into gratitude, knowing that life is impermanent. And it really allowed me to just really cherish my loved ones and my own life, without the fear of what inevitably comes for all of us, you know. And the other thing with that, especially taking this medication, I really wanted to be clear-minded. I wanted to be fully present for my mother the time that she had left. I wanted to do the best that I could through advocacy, through compassion and love.
Mm-hmm.
So that, to me, was also a really important thing for staying really clear and using healthy ways of coping with really devastating loss. And so I surrendered. And surrender, I think, in our culture has a lot of negative connotations, like I'm giving up.
Yeah.
What for me it means is to really surrender to the process, and to acknowledge the things that I could do to affect change. I was not going to be able to ensure that she lives, but I was able to be a part of my family team, who is amazing, and her doctor's teams and things like that, to help her get the best care that she could every step of the way, and to be as pain-free as possible, which is extremely challenging. And so, so surrender isn't do nothing and give up, but it's about finding a peace with what is happening, which is very difficult. And so in my miracle morning, especially because I was sick, I did a lot of yin yoga, which for me was a great segue into my meditation practice. I did meditation every day. I still do. And then I turned to a book that had resonated with me previously. For me, that was Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now. And the one of the most pivotal things for me was the concept of you're not your thoughts, not your body, you're not your emotions. And so that was a freeing concept, because I didn't have to identify with the thoughts that I was having that were about fear and pain. I didn't have to identify with the body. And so for me, that resonated for me. And so I really explored, if I'm not those things, then what am I? And just to stay as general and open-ended as possible, the way that this relates to my process, and that in the way that can be most helpful to anybody, is it had to do with the reading part of my miracle morning practice. And I really just reached out to different texts that I felt could help me grow. For some people, that might be religious or spiritual texts. For some people, that might be psychologists or poets or things like that. That were, for me, it was important for me to understand this on a level, because I could feel deep within me that something was really changing. Because the best way I could describe it is I was having a real shift in my heart and my soul because I was about to lose my mom. And luckily, also from the work that I had done, I had already taken a perspective of seeing, viewing hardships that show up in my life as opportunities to learn, because I could look back on my life and see that every single thing that came into fruition in my life that at the time was challenging or heartbreaking or extremely difficult, all of those things grew me in some way and make me who I am today. And so, so I want to talk a little bit about anticipatory grief, which is what it's called when you're faced with sadness because you know there's a likelihood that of somebody in your life of having some imminent death. And also, I think there's multiple ways that people can have a loss. You know, it could be the loss of a relationship, the loss of some sort of physical function. It could be a geographical change. I think that grief can show up in different ways and different aspects.
Even in the cancer world, like I know there's lots of people that struggle with grieving, after they have had cancer, like, I'm not the same person anymore, maybe because part of my body is not the same, or, you're so right, that, it doesn't necessarily only mean losing a person. There is a lot more into it.
Yes, and when I for me, luckily we live in a day and age where you can pretty much either Google on YouTube whatever kind of meditation you want related to any topic or things like that. There's so much technology that brings such a huge variety, and so some of the, for example, meditations that I would look up, they would talk about it as if the loss had occurred, and it helped me to realize that what I was experiencing was anticipatory grief. And there were also, around the time of my mom's emergency surgery, I found myself really, like, when I would leave her, because I didn't stay by her side 24/7, I would hold myself in this pain state and hold on to the the difficulties and challenges that she was going through. And what I realized through that was that that wasn't doing anything to help her. And it was depleting my ability to be there for her. And so it helped me kind of shift in terms of balancing stepping into the space with her and being present and compassionate with her, with how challenging that whole process was, and then also being able to step out of it and not feel like I had to cling to the pain.
And almost like replenish your energy as well, right? Like, because you needed your full cup, so you could be there 100% for her. So it sounds like, you know you, instead of, and look, I haven't gone through that myself, but which is, it's hard for us to know how we're gonna react to something that happened to us. But it sounds like that instead of, like, getting into this powerless and I can't do anything mode, while watching a loved one dying, you took charge of your health, physically at the time, because you were not well, and mentally and spiritually, so you could um, heal yourself as you went, kind of thing as well. Because I think, when it comes to, like the whole process, you could just be on that panic mode until your loved one dies, and then you're left with starting your healing process. But it sounds like you were active in healing yourself every single day while, the process was happening and while she's still here.
Yes. And and for me, there was a major aspect of connecting with a part of myself that isn't my mind, that isn't my body, that gave me access to an internal source of peace and joy and gratitude. even in the midst of this. And I do not mean that I was also devastated, also very stressed out.
Yeah.
So I was all of those things. Like, and in that time period, people will say, like, gosh, how are you doing? And I would just say, I'm everything. And so I don't want to pretend that this was easy or that it wasn't painful. And so so I also really had an intention that I didn't want to grieve her before she was gone. And that allowed me to really stay in the present moment and realize that she still was with us.
Mm.
But at the same time, and especially looking back, the grieving certainly had started. And on one hand, and I think that while this process was extremely painful for her, it was painful for us. And but at the same time, there's a certain level of grace because it gives you time to adjust, and it gives you time to just be with that person and appreciate their life, and have any conversations that you want to. I developed some grieving practices within that time period. I wouldn't necessarily call, like at the time, I wouldn't give them that name. It's just that it kind of emerged. And of course, meditation, as I've said, is one of them. I felt a very strong need to go for walks barefoot where my feet were touching the earth, and having that connection. I really feel that there is a grounding that for me, I was very aware of and was very soothing. I have kind of this practice that is kind of like heart grieving. And I can describe it by just allowing myself to fall apart and put myself back together again, kind of in one session. So, really, when grief did show up, and to this day, when it shows up, as long as I'm in any kind of position to give the grief the space, do. And I allow it to be. Sometimes I would be driving along and I'd pull over to a park so I could be directly on the earth. I if I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, but for me, there was a physical pain in my heart during some of those grief sessions. And so what I would do is lay flat on the ground. And again, like really allow the earth to accept what was coming through. And that was a huge comfort. I also would kind of put myself into a plank, like if you imagine a plank position where you're doing kind of a push-up stance, but except for having your hands be the point that's supporting you, your upper body, it would just be my heart. And so really pushing my heart into the earth was just extremely soothing. And so I would just give it space to come out and not try to keep it longer than it needed to be there and not try to push it away. And so
which is so important, right? Like really being honest to yourself and meeting where you were at each day. Because I think, again, it's so tempting to be strong at all of that time while you're watching the loved one not being well, and then leaving your mental and physical health decline while you're not allowing any of your emotions to express, because you need to be strong, you need to be this, you need to be that. And what it sounds like that you've done is that allow yourself to be whoever you needed to be as you went, which is I think it's so important. It's like healing as you go, right? It's like, as opposed to let you fall apart completely after her dying, and then having to really come out of a deep hole.
yeah. And because I knew that my mom was an amazing woman, and she gave love so freely. And so I knew she would also want us to be happy and flourishing again. And so within all of that, there were some gifts that the grief offered me. And I had a saying during that time period was everything's a teacher if you lean in for the lesson. And I just was like, I'm just going to lean in. What can this teach me? And what I noticed was that, for one, I realized that resistance in any form causes pain. So it could be as simple as, oh, this person cut me off in the lane in front of me. We don't think about that as being painful, but it really kind of changes our experience. And so it was as though I was just kind of walking around realizing that anything that I would experience, that I would resist, was more painful than if there was a certain amount of acceptance, which is again not to be confused with doing nothing and being a doormat or whatever. But
yeah. But it's like I said, it's not, isn't it? It's like, yeah, I think again, that you can make a decision in that, in the grieving process, to resist what's happening and not to accept. Like I said, if you had done that throughout the whole process, it would have been so much more painful, and you wouldn't have had all the grace and the gratitude and the experiences you had while she was still here with you, right?
right. And it also, I noticed so much peel away. Like, the thing that really was causing me a lot of pain the year before was my relationship with work, and I was exerting a lot of control, and I just had a really unhealthy relationship with work, which ultimately was what led me to the Miracle Morning. But I just observed all of these things just melt away, that normally I would just resist and
Yeah.
react. And instead of resisting and reacting more and more, I was living
Embracing.
like that. I'm a teacher, and it's stressful, and I give a lot, and it's a big job. Don't get me wrong.
Definitely.
It's not ever life and death.
No.
99.9% of the time it is not. And so just having a perspective of how much I would worry and resist things that were so minor. And it also called me to spend a lot of time with my mother, just sitting with her and holding her hand and memorizing what that felt like. I My family was we let her take the lead about whether or not she wanted to talk about death, which in her case, she didn't talk a lot about death, or after she was gone, it was very, very minimal. And we really just honored that, and we didn't press her to 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 confront what we thought, and sometimes we worried about that, and I have a lot of peace about that now, because we just let her take the lead. And I was very lucky that my whole family, we were always on the page of what she wants. And so we worked together. I was an advocate, same with my sister, and my dad and my brother were all super amazing.
So what would you say to somebody who is out there right now going through, something like that? They have the time, it's not like a sudden death, they've got the time, but obviously, they know that it's going to happen, like they will lose their loved ones. What would you say, what are the things that they can do to help themselves, the situation, and beyond?
Well, the first thing that came to mind when you asked that is, this this won't kill you. You can survive this. And I think for me, I was able to shift my fears about other people dying with gratitude. And of course, I don't look forward to experiencing this again in any way, but I know I can survive it, and I know that you can too. And um, and ultimately, I mean, just about for everything. I mean, people that know me probably are like, "Oh, stop recommending meditation." And
Yeah.
I would just say turn to the things that resonate with you, something that's outside of yourself. Accept the love and support of people that offer it. I also acknowledge that everybody in my life had a different role that they naturally played, and things that they naturally had to offer. And so in that, I was grateful for any role that they could play, and I accepted if they weren't in a position to offer a particular manner of support that I need. But don't. I would say, reach out and connect with others.
Yeah.
And
Like I said, you said before, be an active participant, isn't it? Like, I think that's, you talk about meditation, and I'm a fan of meditation too, but I think the most important thing is to do something, right? As opposed to stay in that state of being helpless and panic and paralyzed, right?
right. And I think that um, that what was sort of the starting point for me and going back to the power of now. Number one, it doesn't require a belief system. The only moment that we'll ever be in is now.
Yeah.
We can never be in the future. You can't solve a problem in the future, and we'll never be in the past. So that's a given. And so bringing it down to the moment in so many contexts. And what really caused me to press forward was like, this moment is really painful. And, my mom's in a lot of pain and all this stuff, which for me, pushed me to go deeper. And I think that's going to look different for every person. And I think that for me, giving grief space and not being afraid of it, not resisting the grief when it comes up. Obviously, there were times when I had to pull it together because I had 30 kids coming in my classroom and I needed to not fall apart. But like I said, if I was driving down the road and I felt a wave coming, then I just pull over and I go put my feet on the earth and have that experience. And by being present and connecting with that inner part of myself, and I'm purposely not defining that, I was able to walk through that time period, seeing love and beauty and even joy, even among some of the most terrible experiences. And it was just a gift, and that might sound gross to some people because it could sound heartless, but there was just a sense of peace and gratitude for everything, because my mother was amazing and she had so much love. One of the things that so many people said about her, especially people of my generation, were like, she made me feel like that I was hers. And so she was like a mother to all. And sometimes I'd be like, well, you only knew her for 5 days when you came one time to visit, like on a summer vacation or something. But that's just, and she was very, and she herself wasn't running out in front of the moment anticipating her death. I don't know, because she was just present with it, and that wasn't something she wanted to share with me, and I allowed that, and that was her choice. But she had a lot of grace and beauty in her own process that was like completely awe-inspiring. And so with that kind of thing, and ultimately it was about 6 or 7 month process.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, it felt long, and I know that there are people that like suffer for much longer, and so it felt, a lot of times in the moment it felt like unbearable, and like and ultimately I learned, I started calling it the deathing process. Like in general, coming into this world is this journey that, at least for a lot of mothers,
Yeah.
the process, and it's a transition, and it's painful. And I was able to observe her deathing process, because we did lose her a little bit at a time. And that was part of like, oh, I was grieving part of it because there were aspects of her that were kind of falling away as she was moving towards that transition. And then I was blessed to be with her when she passed. And at that moment, it kind of all made sense. And so with this kind of slow, people can pass slowly, or they can pass instantly. And I think each one has its gifts and its challenges. The gifts I saw in it was that it offered us time to come together and start healing, even as our hearts were breaking, and to support each other and have those moments with her, and love her so deeply. And so it kind of all made sense. And so after she passed, there were some things about my grief process. One was that I was very, very tender, and I like I said, allowed a lot of space for that. And I was very, I considered a lot about any position I would put myself in. For me, I couldn't be around a lot of people at one time. And which was strange because I love concerts and I love dancing, and that felt like too much. And so really just being intuitive about what was a good healing environment for me. And like I said, allowing the love and support of others in whatever capacity, because not a single person was able to do everything that I needed. And I was blessed to have everybody in my life offer something different that together.
Was it hard to say yes to help? Because I know that we're living in a world today that, these days, we find it very hard to say yes for help. And then when people ask, like, how are you? In a situation like you were, it was very easy to go like, oh yeah, I'm fine, and just kind of brush it away,
I tend to accept help pretty well. Sometimes I'm like, I'm really good at people, putting people to work. So you better mean it if you're offering help. I just know people in my life that have a harder time accepting that help. And then also, I think that it could have been easy in my nature to sort of covet what I thought I wanted from a particular person. And luckily, part really just stayed in like, this is what this person has to offer. There are some people that didn't have an experience of this kind of loss and really didn't understand the gravity of it. And I was just thankful for that, because I don't want everybody to experience this. And so just really accepting that. One of the insights that I really got out of this is that, and from my perception of what's inside of all of us, is a deep source of love. And so when I have a grief session, which of course still happens.
How long ago was it that your mom died now?
It'll be 2 years from June. Yeah. And so I give it space. I lean into it. I let myself fall apart. when the session's over, I kind of put myself back together, not in a way that's forcing it, but kind of just collecting myself. I'll be sensitive for a little while, and then I thank it, because for me, it feels that every time I experience grief, I learn more about unconditional love.
Yeah.
I more about the beauty and the miracle of life.
Yeah.
And there's, luckily we can, in a lot of times in our lives, we can pretend that death isn't there, but it is a part. And for me, it really is what makes it so sacred and special.
Yeah.
And it gives more meaning. I celebrate my mother. Her birthday is coming up next week, and here I gathered my family, and I, for myself, I sang her happy birthday, and I lit some candles and just said some things. And the biggest thing for me is when I was for me, and this is different for everybody. And I think that for me, because I gave it a lot of space, there was about like a 4-month time period where it was just very heavy and it was very present. But for me, I think allowing that process to just keep flowing through me, I was able to shift into a lightness and things that I was, and experiencing joy and gratitude as kind of my normal baseline. And then times of having grief sessions come up. When I was in those acute stages of grief, I didn't really know what parts of myself would come back online. And I had some fear around that, like, will I be silly again? Will I be joyful and dorky and want to dance like no one's watching? Because I love to do that. But at the same time, I also wanted to be different as a result. I wanted to have a way that I would change to honor her. And so for part of that healing was taking and thinking about the qualities that that she represented and the things that she gifted me and gifted the people around her through her words and deeds and actions. She was very service oriented. She loved people. She was very present and typically, wasn't stressed out and things like that. But, and so one of the things that I do is I bring the miracle morning practice to my students. And I continually look for ways, because I feel like every one of my students is mine, just like all of my friends. Like I say, oh, my kids, because I feel like they're my kids. They are my kids. And ultimately, I think about ways that I can help them have the sensation and the experience that I feel that way about them, and to share my love in the world.
That's beautiful. It's such a beautiful way to support them with real tools for life. If we were to taught kids this, your 6 steps, as a morning practice, as opposed to, just teaching them curriculum stuff, I think we would potentially have a much better society and world and planet, and because we would be healing ourselves each day, right, when we show up to ourselves. And I think that, I remember when you first told me that you share with them, I thought it was a really beautiful way to share your learnings with them, right?
Yeah, because I think one of the first things that, even before she passed, one of the first things that felt like a change in me was that I needed to teach to the heart, just in the same way that I'm teaching to their minds. And I think that speaks to that. And the way that my brother and my sister and I and my dad all worked together to support her, that all came from the love that she showed.
Yeah.
And so, it's about doing things like that that really feel there. And I feel like she's with me in some way. I don't try to prescribe the way that the mystery of life and death works.
Yeah.
But I do get the sensation that she's with me, and I feel her essence, I feel her smile, and it's the love that lives
That's
forever.
beautiful.
And and just in the same way that I'm sharing this um, to hopefully help somebody,
Yeah.
and I dedicate this to my mother, Julie Ann Champlin.
Oh,
Amazing, and I love her and miss her.
that's so beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing this beautiful story. And from somebody who hasn't gone through that myself, I've learned so much from you today. And, when we first spoke, when you shared your journey with me, I felt that there was so much learning, and the way that you went about it was so beautiful. The way that you healed yourself, the way throughout the whole experience, one of the most painful experience that one can go through, right? The way that you react to it, the way that you took control. So I'm really grateful that our paths have crossed, and I'm sure this chat is going to help so many people going through that, that grief process, and so they can find some little spots of light, and utilize maybe some of those tools, so they can heal themselves as well while going through this process. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work that you're doing as well.
Take care.